When a devoted husband discovers unsettling clues about his wife's secret life, his world begins to crumble. Driven by suspicion, he uncovers a web of betrayal that challenges everything he believed about their marriage. As he pieces together the truth, he faces shocking revelations, not just about his wife, but about his own identity as a father and partner. Fueled by heartbreak and anger, he plots a course of revenge that not only exposes the lies but redefines the boundaries of love, trust, and redemption. In a twist-packed journey of deception and reckoning, this intimate tale explores how far one man will go to reclaim his life from the ashes of betrayal. It began like any other day, calm, predictable, ordinary. The chaos of getting the kids ready for school filled the house, with laughter and occasional bursts of frustration. Claire was her usual self, rushing around with an air of organized efficiency, while I fumbled with breakfast and missing backpacks. We had our rhythm, a dance of responsibilities that seemed to hum along effortlessly. At least, that's what I thought. The moment that shattered the routine arrived with a single phone call. The number was unfamiliar, and at first, I considered ignoring it. But something, a nagging intuition, made me pick up. Claire's voice greeted me on the other end, breathless and tinged with worry. "Hey, it's me," she said quickly. "I just wanted to let you know my purse was stolen last night. It's such a mess, but I've already talked to my boss, and she's arranging everything. Can you cancel our credit cards as soon as possible?" My mind spun as I listened. Claire losing her purse. It seemed out of character. She was meticulous, always careful about her belongings. Still, I didn't press her for details. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I'll handle it right away." "Thank you," she sighed, her voice softening. "I hate to bother you with this. I miss you and the kids. I'll call later." The conversation ended, but the unease lingered. It wasn't just the unusual circumstance, it was something about her tone. Distant. Preoccupied. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, we'd been married for 8 years. Claire and I had built a life together, a partnership rooted in trust. Why would I doubt her? As the day unfolded, the phone call receded to the back of my mind. I busied myself with work and errands, the usual distractions that filled my days. But that evening, as I went through the mail, a familiar name caught my eye, Claire's investment account. She rarely discussed it, preferring to handle those matters herself, but the envelope had been left on the counter. I hesitated before opening it. Claire wasn't secretive, but she valued her privacy. Yet curiosity got the better of me, and I unfolded the statement. My eyes scanned the document, noting the usual entries, until one transaction jumped out, a $3,000 check to a local jewelry store. The confusion was immediate. Jewelry? Claire hadn't mentioned buying anything recently. I tried to rationalize it, perhaps a gift for an upcoming event, or something for the kids. But the timing gnawed at me. The check was dated just days after her stolen purse incident. It didn't add up. The unease from that morning surged back, stronger this time. I decided to let it go for the night, but sleep eluded me. I lay awake, replaying the details in my mind, searching for an explanation that made sense. None came. The next day, I decided to call the jewelry store. A woman answered, cheerful and eager to help. I explained that I needed information about a recent purchase, mentioning Claire's name and the date of the transaction. "Oh, yes, I remember her," the woman said brightly. She was so upset about losing her wedding and engagement rings. She came in to replace them. My breath caught. Wedding and engagement rings. Claire had never told me she'd lost them. The woman continued, oblivious to my growing silence. She mentioned it was such a heartbreaking loss, but we found something she loved. A stunning set, really. I mumbled a polite thank you and ended the call, my hands shaking. The world I thought I knew was starting to unravel. Why hadn't Claire told me about losing her rings? What else hadn't she told me? When Claire came home that evening, I decided to confront her. I chose my moment carefully, waiting until the kids were in bed and the house was quiet. As she sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, I approached. "Claire, can we talk?" She looked up, startled by my tone. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I called the jewelry store today," I began, keeping my voice steady. "They told me about the rings." Her expression froze, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. Instead, she let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, that. It was such a mess, but I didn't want to bother you with it. I handled it." "Handled it?" I echoed, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Claire, you lost your wedding and engagement rings. How is that something you just handle without telling me?" She fidgeted, her hands twisting in her lap. "I didn't want to worry you. It wasn't a big deal." "Not a big deal?" The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "Claire, those rings are symbolic. They mean something to both of us." Her gaze darted away, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, guilt, maybe, or fear. But she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "You're overreacting," she said lightly. "It's all fine now. Can we drop it?" I wanted to press further, but the weight of the moment stopped me. Something was wrong, and I needed to know the truth. But not like this. Not yet. That night, as Claire slept beside me, I reached for her phone. It was locked, but I knew her password. My hands trembled as I entered it, unsure of what I hoped, or feared, to find. The messages were the first clue. Flirty, suggestive texts from someone named Greg. My chest tightened as I scrolled, each word driving the knife deeper. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait for next time." The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. This wasn't just a mistake. It was betrayal. And it wasn't over. The next morning, the world felt like it had shifted on its axis. Everything looked the same, the sunlight streaming through the window, the soft sounds of the kids stirring in their rooms, but I was different. The knowledge I carried now weighed heavily on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Claire was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared breakfast, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I watched her for a moment, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the person whose texts had burned into my memory. The betrayal wasn't just in the words, it was in the fact that she had chosen to keep secrets from me, to live a life I wasn't a part of. "Morning," she said brightly, flashing me a smile. "Coffee's ready. Did you sleep well?" I nodded, forcing a neutral expression. "Yeah, fine." It was a lie, of course. I had barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. The texts weren't explicit enough to provide definitive proof, but they left no room for innocent explanations either. Greg wasn't just a coworker or a casual friend. He was something far more insidious, and I needed to know exactly what. Over the next few days, I became a man on a mission. I started watching Claire more closely, noting the times she was on her phone, the frequency of her late-night texts. When she mentioned another upcoming work trip, I barely held back my skepticism. "This Friday?" I asked casually, trying to sound indifferent. "Yeah," she said, sipping her coffee. "It's a short one. I'll be back Sunday evening." I nodded, my face a mask of calm. Inside, I was seething. Another work trip, another opportunity for her to see Greg. I couldn't let it go on. I had to know the truth. That night, I stayed up long after Claire had gone to bed. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, and I waited until her breathing grew deep and steady before I reached for it. The password hadn't changed. My hands shook as I unlocked the device and opened her messages. This time, the exchange with Greg was more explicit. "Greg, counting down the days. I can't wait to see you again. It's been too long. Claire, I know. I'm looking forward to it too. I've missed you. The bile rose in my throat as I read the words. There was no ambiguity now. This wasn't just flirting, this was an affair. And it wasn't new. The familiarity in their messages spoke of a relationship that had been going on for months, maybe longer. I took screenshots of everything, my mind already formulating a plan. I couldn't confront her yet, not without solid proof. I needed more. Something irrefutable. The next day, I hired a private investigator. It felt like a drastic step, but I couldn't trust myself to gather the evidence I needed. The investigator, a grizzled man named Eric, listened to my story with a practiced air of professionalism. "You're doing the right thing," he said, jotting down notes. "If she's been cheating, we'll find out." He asked for her itinerary, her usual haunts, and any details I could provide about Greg. I gave him everything, my emotions a volatile mix of anger and sadness. As I left his office, I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, I was taking control. The days leading up to her trip were a blur. I went through the motions, pretending everything was normal, while inside I seethed. Claire, for her part, seemed oblivious. She packed her bags with a spring in her step, kissed me on the cheek, and told me she loved me before walking out the door. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for the phone call from Eric that would confirm what I already knew. When it finally came, the words hit me like a punch to the gut. "She's with him," Eric said simply. "They checked into a hotel about an hour ago. I've got pictures." I closed my eyes, the weight of the truth settling over me. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was fact. Claire had betrayed me, and now I had the proof to confront her. The next morning, when she returned home, I was ready. The evidence was laid out on the dining table, photos, text messages, and the details of her trysts with Greg. When she walked in, her face lit up in surprise. "You're home," she said, setting down her bag. "I thought you had errands today." "I cleared my schedule," I replied coldly. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, and she looked at me warily. "About what?" I gestured to the table. "About this." She hesitated, then stepped closer. Her eyes widened as she took in the evidence, the color draining from her face. What is this?" she stammered. "You tell me," I said, my voice hard. "Who's Greg, Claire? And how long has this been going on?" Her hands trembled as she reached for the photos. "It's not what it looks like," she began, her voice trembling. "Don't insult my intelligence," I snapped. "I've read the texts. I've seen the pictures. I know everything." She sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I laughed bitterly. "A mistake? Claire, this wasn't a one-time thing. You've been lying to me for months, maybe longer. Do you have any idea what you've done to our family? To me?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to hurt you. I swear. I love you, I do." "Love?" I spat the word. "You don't do this to someone you love. You don't destroy their trust, their life, for what? A fling? Excitement?" She didn't respond, her silence speaking volumes. I stood, my hands clenched into fists. "I can't do this anymore, Claire. I deserve better. The kids deserve better. Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't leave. Let's talk about this. We can fix it." I shook my head, the anger boiling over. "Fix it? There's no fixing this. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Without another word, I walked out, leaving her sobbing at the table. The world outside felt sharp and unforgiving, but for the first time in weeks, I could breathe again. The truth was painful, but it was also freeing. This was the beginning of something new, something better. The house was quiet as I drove away, the muffled sound of Claire's sobs echoing faintly in my mind. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the weight of what had just happened pressing heavily on my chest. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life turning out. I had spent years building a family, a home, a future, and it had all unraveled in an instant. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I parked at a nearby diner and ordered coffee I didn't intend to drink. I needed to think, to plan my next steps. The confrontation had been necessary, but it wasn't the end. I still had to navigate the fallout, for myself, for our kids, and even for Claire. Despite everything, she was still their mother, and I couldn't let my anger blind me to that. As I sat there, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Eric, the private investigator. "Eric, need to meet. There's something you should know." My stomach tightened. What else could there be? I replied quickly, and he sent me an address. It wasn't far, so I paid for my untouched coffee and headed out. Eric's office was a modest space tucked away in a strip mall. He greeted me with a nod and gestured for me to sit. "There's more to this story than I originally thought," he began, sliding a folder across the desk. "Greg isn't just some guy. He's got a history, and it's not pretty." I opened the folder, scanning its contents. Greg had a long trail of relationships that ended in chaos, affairs, financial manipulation, even accusations of fraud. He wasn't just a philanderer, he was a predator, and Claire had walked right into his web. My anger, already simmering, began to boil over again. "Does she know about this?" Eric shrugged. "Hard to say. People like Greg are good at hiding their true selves until it's too late. But if she doesn't know, she's going to find out the hard way." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Thanks, Eric. I appreciate your help." He nodded, his expression neutral. "Just be careful. Situations like this can get messy fast." When I returned home, the atmosphere was tense. Claire was sitting on the couch, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked up as I entered, her eyes pleading. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know what else to say." I ignored her, walking past her to grab a glass of water. The kids were upstairs, mercifully unaware of the storm raging below. "For now." "I found out more about Greg," I said finally, my voice cold. "Did you know he's a con artist? That he's used women like you before and left them with nothing?" Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and she nodded. "He told me some things, but I didn't know it was that bad." "Of course, you didn't," I snapped. "Because you were too busy sneaking around to think about the consequences." She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. My patience was gone. "You've jeopardized everything, our marriage, our family, for what? For someone who doesn't even respect you enough to be honest." "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I see that now." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "This wasn't a mistake, Claire. It was a choice. A series of choices you made over and over again." She buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled but still audible. I wanted to feel sympathy, but all I felt was anger and betrayal. Over the next few days, I started to put my life back together, or at least tried to. I reached out to a lawyer to discuss my options. Claire's infidelity gave me solid ground for a divorce, and I was determined to protect myself and the kids. Claire, meanwhile, seemed lost. She tried to apologize, to make amends, but her efforts only deepened the divide between us. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal, the lies, the months, maybe years, of deceit. One evening, as I was packing some of my belongings, she approached me. "Please," she said softly. "Don't give up on us." I didn't even look at her. "You gave up on us the moment you started this affair." Her tears started again, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. My trust in her was shattered, and no amount of apologies could piece it back together. A week later, I filed for divorce. The process was straightforward but emotionally draining. Claire was devastated, but she didn't fight me. Maybe she knew she had no leg to stand on. Maybe she felt the weight of her actions and couldn't bear to push back. The kids were the hardest part. We sat them down together to explain what was happening, and their confusion and sadness cut deeper than any betrayal ever could. "Is it because of us?" our youngest asked, her big eyes brimming with tears. "No," I said quickly, pulling her into a hug. "This has nothing to do with you. Your mom and I just need to live apart for a while." It wasn't the full truth, but it was all they needed to hear. As the weeks turned into months, the dust began to settle. I moved into a small apartment nearby, close enough to stay involved in the kids' lives. Claire stayed in the house, a shadow of her former self. I didn't take any joy in her pain, but I couldn't bring myself to offer her comfort either. One evening, as I was unpacking boxes in my new place, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Eric. "Eric, thought you'd want to know, Greg skipped town. Looks like he's done with her." I stared at the screen, a mix of satisfaction and sadness washing over me. Claire had chosen Greg, and now she was paying the price. But it didn't bring me the closure I'd hoped for. Revenge, I realized, wasn't what I needed. What I needed was to move on, to rebuild my life and focus on the future. For myself, for my kids, and for the person I wanted to become. Months passed, and the rhythm of my new life began to settle. I divided my time between work, my apartment, and the kids. They adapted faster than I expected, their resilience both a source of pride and guilt. Claire and I communicated sparingly, mostly about logistics or the children. Each interaction was strained but civil, just enough to avoid adding more weight to their young shoulders. One Friday evening, after dropping the kids off at Claire's for the weekend, I decided to treat myself. I went to a quiet bar downtown, ordered a drink, and let the low hum of conversation and soft music wash over me. The solitude felt different now, not lonely, but peaceful. As I sipped my whiskey, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "Claire, I need to talk to you. Please come by tomorrow. It's important." I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The divorce was final, there was nothing left to discuss. Still, her tone was different, not pleading or regretful, but urgent. Against my better judgment, I replied. "I'll stop by in the morning." The next day, I arrived at the house, our former home, with cautious curiosity. Claire opened the door, her face pale and drawn. She looked different, as if she hadn't slept in weeks. She stepped aside to let me in without a word. "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She gestured to the living room, where a small stack of papers sat on the coffee table. "I need to show you something." I sat down, my eyes scanning the documents. At first, they didn't make sense: bank statements, receipts, a series of legal forms. Then the pieces clicked into place, and a cold chill ran through me. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. "It's Greg," she said, her voice shaking. "He didn't just leave. He drained my savings, maxed out my credit cards, and left me with a mountain of debt. I don't know what to do." For a moment, I felt the anger rise again, but it was quickly replaced by something else: pity. Greg hadn't just betrayed her trust, he had destroyed her. The person sitting in front of me was a shadow of the woman I once knew. "I'm sorry," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "For everything. For what I did to us, to you, to our family. I know I don't deserve your help, but I don't know who else to turn to. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. Part of me wanted to walk away, to tell her this was the bed she had made and now she had to lie in it. But then I thought of our kids, of the life we had shared before everything fell apart. Claire's choices had hurt me deeply, but they didn't erase the years of love and partnership that had come before. What do you need? I asked finally, my voice quieter than I expected. Her head shot up, surprise flashing in her eyes. I don't want money, she said quickly. I just need advice. Guidance. I don't know how to handle this. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. We'll figure it out. Over the next few weeks, I helped Claire navigate the mess Greg had left behind. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't pleasant, but it felt right. I wasn't doing it for her, I was doing it for the family we had built, for the kids who deserved stability and peace. In the process, something unexpected happened. Claire began to change. She took responsibility for her actions, not just with words but with actions. She started going to therapy, working extra hours, and selling off things she didn't need to chip away at the debt. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. One evening, as I was helping the kids with homework at my apartment, my phone buzzed. A message from Eric, the investigator. Eric, found something you'll want to see. Can we meet? Curiosity piqued, I agreed. The next day, I met Eric at his office. He handed me an envelope, his expression unreadable. What's this? I asked. Something that came up while I was digging into Greg, he said. I wasn't sure whether to tell you before, but I think you should know. I opened the envelope, pulling out a series of documents. At first, I didn't understand. Then my heart stopped. Birth certificates. Hospital records. DNA tests. What is this? I stammered. Eric leaned forward, his voice low. Your youngest, she's not biologically yours. The words hit me like a freight train. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. The dates lined up with Claire's affair. She had been unfaithful long before Greg, and she had never told me. The room spun as the weight of the revelation sank in. My youngest, the little girl I had loved and raised as my own, wasn't mine. Yet, in my heart, she was. When I confronted Claire later that night, her reaction was immediate: tears, apologies, desperation. She admitted the truth, confirming what the papers already told me. But as I looked at her, I realized something I hadn't expected. This betrayal, as devastating as it was, didn't change my love for my daughter. She was mine in every way that mattered. And while Claire's actions were unforgivable, they didn't erase the bond one had with my children. We'll co-parent, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. But I can't be with you. Not after this. Claire nodded, her face crumpling. I understand. Life didn't magically fix itself after that. There were challenges, tears, and moments of doubt. But there was also growth. I built a life around my kids, around the values I wanted to uphold. And though Claire remained a part of that life, it was on my terms. As for Greg, he vanished like smoke in the wind. A fitting end for someone who thrived on chaos. But his betrayal, in a strange way, was the catalyst for my freedom. And in that freedom, I found myself again. A little broken, a little scarred, but stronger. Ready for whatever came next.